Brenner Bailey knew something was wrong the moment his left arm went numb halfway through the drill. He didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't even swear, which, for Brenner, was uncharacteristic. He just stared at the awkward bend in his forearm and muttered to no one in particular, "Well, that's not ideal." The impact had come during a training simulation on the Glavatrix, a diplomatic vessel shared between humans and the Veraxi coalition. It wasn't war, it wasn't combat, just a zero-grav navigation drill through the maintenance shafts. Brenner had misjudged the angle, clipped a stabilizing rod, and been flung into a bulkhead. Hard. Now he floated in the shaft, tethered by his safety line, blinking at the jagged angle of his arm, a few centimeters above his wrist. It didn't look like it should be part of him anymore. "Brenner, you are not moving," said a voice through his comms. It was Dr. Elchi, the Glavatrix's chief medical officer, and a Veraxi, tall, bluish, and shaped vaguely like a walking stick insect, if a walking stick insect had a medical degree and a perpetual sense of mild panic. "I think I broke my arm," Brenner replied, his voice level but strained. There was silence. Then Elchi responded with something that sounded like a gasp and a whistle mashed together. "Emergency medical retrieval in progress," Elchi said. "Do not attempt movement. Do not attempt anything." "No plans to," Brenner said and shut his eyes against the throb now blooming from his forearm up to his shoulder. The med team arrived in under 5 minutes. Brenner floated as still as he could while 2 Veraxi medics stabilized his arm with a portable splint and gently maneuvered him into a stretcher capsule. They whisked him through the corridors of the Glavatrix, past crew members who paused to peer at the human with wide, uncertain eyes. Inside the medical bay, Brenner winced as they adjusted the capsule into a low-gravity cradle. Elchi hovered nervously nearby, scanning a tablet-like device with flitting fingers. "Pain level?" Elchi asked, his antennae twitching. 7, Brenner said. "Maybe 8 when you bumped it just now." 7? 7? Elchi's voice wobbled. "You should be unconscious." "That's not how it works for us," Brenner muttered. Elchi swept over to a console and started inputting data. Another Veraxi medic approached with a scanner the size of a small football and began analyzing Brenner's arm. The machine beeped and displayed a 3D image of his forearm, highlighting a clean break in the radius and a hairline fracture in the ulna. "Definitive fracture," the medic said. "Bone integrity compromised. Ligament stress present. No arterial rupture. Internal bleeding minimal." Elchi turned sharply. "You are stable. But your bone it is completely severed at mid-shaft. This is catastrophic." Brenner blinked. "It's not catastrophic. It's a broken arm." Elchi stared at him, unblinking. "Catastrophic," he repeated. "A rupture of internal support structure plus ligament stress. This would end a Veraxi's functional life." "Well, lucky I'm not one. You must be sedated immediately. We must immobilize you fully. You will be in recovery for I cannot say. You may never regain full use of this limb." Brenner sighed and pushed himself up slightly. "It's just another Tuesday document." Elchi recoiled. "Tuesday? I am unfamiliar. Is that a human medical condition?" "No," Brenner said, gritting his teeth as his arm throbbed again. "It means this kind of thing happens more often than you'd think." They ran more scans, set the bone under anesthesia, and wrapped his arm in a rigid polymer cast that would harden in hours. Elchi insisted on monitoring him every 10 minutes, which Brenner endured with admirable patience for the first hour and then with growing irritation. "You are not responding with appropriate distress," Elchi said during one of the check-ins. "Painkillers, man. And also, I've broken bones before." Elchi turned to look at the display above Brenner's bed. "More than once. 3 times. Once when I fell off a garage roof. Another time during a bike accident. And once when a crate of field rations slipped off a loader." "You survived all of that?" "Obviously." Elchi leaned in slightly. "Are all humans like this?" "Like what?" "Unconcerned with catastrophic injury." "We're concerned," Brenner said. "We just don't shut down over it." Elchi looked both fascinated and unsettled. He tapped the edge of his scanner. "The Veraxi experience cellular collapse from injuries of this nature. We do not recover." "Yeah, well, we're built different. Elchi didn't respond, but turned and began recording a voice memo in his native language. Brenner watched him for a while, then let himself doze off. He awoke to soft pressure around his fingers. A Veraxi nurse was checking circulation through the cast. "Any pain?" she asked. "Yes," Brenner said. "Still 7. Maybe 6 now." Elchi returned with a small tray of nutrient packs and a list of instructions. "You must remain in the medical bay for 3 planetary rotations," he said. "You will not engage in exercise. You will not perform manual tasks. You will not leave this room. I can't just stay in bed for 3 days. You must," Elchi insisted. "Any movement could result in misalignment. And if that occurs, we will have to refracture to correct." Brenner didn't argue. He simply nodded and leaned back. 3 days passed. Brenner was visited by several Veraxi scientists and even the ship's ambassador, each curious, some hesitant to see the human who had survived what they considered an unlivable injury. Brenner answered questions when he was awake, mostly about bone density, pain tolerance, and whether human bones could be regrown. He explained the difference between healing and regrowing, clarified that broken bones healed naturally and that casts simply held everything in place. Elchi was present for every interview, becoming increasingly fascinated by human physiology. He compiled reports, diagrams, and even a side-by-side comparison of Veraxi and human skeletal systems. On the 4th day, Brenner was allowed to leave the medical bay under strict orders to avoid strenuous activity. He walked slowly, arms supported in a sling. Crew members gave him wide berths, as if he might collapse at any moment. "Why do they all look at me like I died and came back?" Brenner asked Elchi as they passed a group of engineers. "They believe you are exceptional. I tripped in a duct and broke my arm. And then you kept speaking in full sentences," Elchi said. Brenner chuckled. "Well, what was I supposed to do? Scream and pass out? That is the expected reaction." Brenner shook his head. "You've got a lot to learn about humans." That night, he sat alone in the mess hall, sipping lukewarm soup with his uninjured hand. Across the room, 2 Veraxi watched him. One whispered something to the other and gestured to his sling. Brenner didn't react. He just kept sipping. He was cleared for light duties after a week. No heavy lifting, no climbing, no zero-grav maneuvers. Just observation and some interface work. Elchi checked in twice daily, meticulously recording every twinge, ache, and improvement. After 2 weeks, the swelling had gone down, the pain had reduced to a dull throb, and the cast was replaced with a lighter brace. Brenner began physical therapy under the guidance of a human medic transferred from another vessel. The sessions were brief but exhausting. Even gripping a stylus left him sweating. Elchi observed every session. "Why do you push through the discomfort?" he asked. "Because if I don't, I'll never get full function back. But you endure suffering. I'd endure worse to use my arm again." Elchi pondered that in silence. By the 5th week, Brenner could lift a 1-kilogram weight. It wasn't much, but it was something. He still wore the brace and still avoided physical tasks, but he moved more freely. The ship's morale team invited him to a social gathering. He declined. Instead, he found himself in the med bay watching Elchi review scans on the main display. "You're still studying the injury?" Brenner asked. "Yes," Elchi replied. "I am attempting to understand how your biology recovers without cellular regeneration. It's called healing. It is inefficient, but remarkable." Brenner offered a tired smile. "You'll get used to us." "I do not think I will ever understand you," Elchi said. "But I am learning. You're not the only one." By the 8th week, the brace came off. The bone had fully fused, but the muscle was still weak. Brenner began strength training, starting small, progressing slowly. He never reclaimed full grip strength in that hand. Maybe he never would. But he could write, lift, and even type again. And that was enough. One afternoon, as he helped recalibrate a guidance relay, a junior Veraxi engineer asked nervously, "Is it true you once broke your entire arm and did not perish?" Brenner paused. looked down at the relay, then said, "Yeah, just another Tuesday." The engineer stared at him in awe. Brenner didn't laugh. He didn't joke. He just finished the relay calibration and moved on to the next panel. Elchi watched from the corridor, silently recording something into his log. And somewhere in the ship's databanks, under the section titled Human Medical Anomalies, the entry for fracture recovery, type arm, now read, subject, Brenner Bailey, prognosis, full recovery, notes, did not perish. The first time Brenner's hand cramped during a systems diagnostic, he dropped the spanner, flexed his fingers once, and muttered something that made the nearest Veraxi technician recoil, as if he'd uttered a death curse. "Is your limb failing?" the tech asked, backing a full meter away. Brenner shook out the stiffness. "No, just a muscle spasm." "Happens when you've been off it for a while." The technician, young, translucent-skinned, barely old enough to be assigned off-planet, watched him as though he might shed his skin and collapse in a pile of bones. "Should I summon the medical unit?" "Only if you see me on fire," Brenner said, rotating his wrist in slow circles. "Otherwise, I'm good." The Veraxi blinked once, then twice, rapidly. It was their species' closest approximation of disbelief. They were in the reconfiguration bay, a cavernous chamber filled with modular systems being refitted for an upcoming diplomatic mission to the Thalvarin cluster. Brenner had volunteered for light duties, nothing overhead, nothing that required torque, and was assigned to interface calibration on remote signal arrays. Even with one arm still regaining strength, he preferred it to being confined in medical. From across the bay, Elchi appeared, navigating the floor with the stiff determination of someone pretending to stroll casually while actually scanning for signs of disaster. "You are not using that hand again," Elchi said without greeting. Brenner didn't look up. "It's called rehab. You told me to rebuild functionality. You are pushing too fast. I'm rotating a tuning dial. It's not exactly weightlifting." Elchi stepped closer, glancing toward the technician who was now pretending to adjust a console while clearly eavesdropping. "You experienced spasm. That is a warning. It's a cramp, Elchi. It's not an omen. You must report even minor anomalies. If I reported every twinge, you'd make me sleep in a scanner. You are still at risk of, yeah, I know, misalignment, strain, collapse, galactic implosion. You've mentioned it." Elchi's face pinched in what passed for a frown. "You are remarkably uncooperative for someone recovering from structural trauma." Brenner finally looked at him. "You lot keep expecting me to fall apart. I'm not going to. You already did. And now I'm not." The technician coughed nervously and scuttled off. Elchi folded two of his upper limbs behind his back, a gesture Brenner had learned to associate with reluctant resignation. "Fine," Elchi said. "But if you experience another spasm, I'll sit down and drink some water." Hydration is not Elchi. "Yes, I've got this." Elchi didn't argue further. He just stood for a few more seconds, made a quiet entry into his medical log, and left without another word. By the next rotation, Brenner's hand had stopped cramping. The strength was coming back slowly. He could hold a stylus for longer than a minute, grip a handle, even twist a valve without biting back a grunt. The brace was gone, replaced by a soft wrap he only wore during sleep cycles. He was refitting a signal compressor when a ping echoed through the bay's overhead system. "Human specialist Brenner Bailey, report to the diplomatic exchange chamber. Immediate." He glanced at the nearest wall display. Cycle marker was just past middle usually when the ambassadors began their interspecies briefings. He wiped his hands, tightened the wrap on his wrist, and made his way to the upper tier. The chamber was already occupied when he arrived. On the left stood 3 Thalvarin delegates, tall, silver-veined beings whose entire bodies shimmered like a heat mirage. They wore no clothing, just a subtle modulation of skin patterns that indicated rank. On the right stood the Virax Coalition's lead ambassador. In the center, flanked by 2 security personnel, floated a containment pod the size of a small refrigerator. Brenner stepped in, nodded once, and stayed near the wall. "Ah," the ambassador said. "Our human technician. We require your expertise." "I'm not diplomatic staff," Brenner said. "I fix things. This is a thing." He looked at the pod. Inside was what appeared to be a communications relay Thalvern make, judging by the smooth curves and lack of visible interface panels. "It stopped transmitting," the ambassador explained. "The Thalverns claim the issue occurred after transport through our docking array. They believe we damaged it." Brenner approached the pod. "Is it safe to open?" "Yes," the Thalvern closest to the relay said in flawless interlingua. "It is inert, but your handling protocols may have disrupted its core harmonics." Brenner opened the pod. Inside, the relay sat on a cushion of magnetic suspension. He reached in with his left hand, stopped himself, then used his right instead. "Any diagnostics run?" The Thalvern's skin flickered. "Your technology is incompatible." "Then I guess we're doing this the old-fashioned way." He pulled the relay out. No screws, no seams. Just a smooth, egg-shaped unit with a single indentation near the top. He tapped the indentation. Nothing happened. Then he pressed harder, rotating slightly. The surface gave way with a faint click, and a side panel slid open, revealing a crystalline core and what looked like a dense cluster of microfilaments. "Looks like thermal stress on the inner filament array," Brenner said. "Probably from the docking transition. Your materials don't like abrupt inertial shifts." The Thalvern shimmered again. "We assumed the transition was buffered. Your buffer's tuned for your own mass harmonics. Ours are different. You're getting microfriction at the interface point." He pulled a slim tool from his belt, adjusted the filament cluster, and reseated the crystal with a gentle push. "There," he said. "Should be stable." He handed the unit to the Thalvern. They held it carefully, pressed the indentation, and a soft chime resonated. "If it goes back offline, you'll need to refit the stabilizer with a neutral drift housing," Brenner added. "We can fabricate one if you give us the specs." The Thalvern nodded. "You understand this technology without formal instruction?" "I understand how systems fail," Brenner said. "Doesn't matter who built them." The ambassador exhaled, a sound that translated awkwardly through his breathing ports. "Excellent. That concludes the matter." As Brenner turned to leave, one of the Thalverns said, "You are the one who sustained severe internal failure, yes?" Brenner paused. "If you mean the arm thing, yeah. It is curious that you are still permitted operational duties. Why wouldn't I be? In our physiology, such an event would result in disbandment from function." Brenner shrugged. "Guess it's a good thing I'm not you." Later that cycle, back in the engineering suite, he found Elchi waiting near the access ladder. "Word travels fast," Brenner said. "You handled Thalvern tech." "I fixed a relay." "With an arm still in recovery." Brenner leaned against the ladder. "You gonna write me up or ask how I did it?" "I have already documented the event." "I wish to understand something else." "Shoot. Why do you choose to continue physical engagement when your body has not fully restored?" "Because it's my job." Elchi tilted his head. "But you could rest longer. You could wait until strength is perfect." "If I waited for perfect, I'd never do anything." There was a long pause. "We do not resume function with imperfection," Elchi said. "I noticed. You accept that your restoration is incomplete." "Yeah. And still you proceed. Because if I didn't, I'd start thinking about everything that hurts." "And that doesn't help either." Elchi tapped his tablet. "You are the only species I've observed that views injury as temporary by default. Isn't it? For most, it is definitive." Brenner climbed halfway up the ladder, then paused. "Well," he said, "maybe that's why we keep surviving things we shouldn't." 3 cycles later, during a systems drill, the intercom blared with an alert. A power relay had shorted in one of the lower decks. No injuries, but partial blackout across several compartments. Brenner was the closest tech on duty. He sprinted down 2 levels, bypassed a locked hatch, and wedged himself into the crawl space. The relay panel was sparking, exposed wiring sizzling against the frame. He reached in, yanked the emergency disconnect, and waited for the hum to die. His left hand twinged, but he ignored it. When backup power kicked in, the lights stabilized. He wiped his forehead, coughed once, and slid back out. A small crowd had gathered, including 2 Veraxi engineers and a maintenance AI on a rolling base. "You entered a live relay," one engineer said. "It was arcing," Brenner replied. "Didn't have time to wait for clearance. That's extremely dangerous." "Yep, you could have lost function again." "Maybe," Brenner said. "But the panel's down and no one's fried." Elchi arrived moments later, scanned him head to toe, and said only, "You're impossible." Brenner didn't respond. He just looked at the panel, flexed his hand once, and walked away. Back in his quarters that night, he sat with his arm in a cooling wrap, fingers aching from the day's work. He stared at them, still attached, still bruised, still his. He didn't feel invincible, but he felt real. And sometimes that was enough. Brenner was halfway through removing a corroded junction plate in the waste heat exchanger when something hissed directly behind him. Not the usual steam bleed or pressure seal release, this was a distinct, wet, biological hiss. He turned his head slowly. 40 centimeters away, a Veraxi maintenance crawler was perched awkwardly on the bulkhead. 3 limbs wrapped around a coolant pipe. One eye stalk aimed squarely at him. "Didn't hear you come in," Brenner said, voice calm but already regretting not bringing the handheld translator. The crawler blinked both eyes in sequence, then opened its mouth, actually more of a spiraling valve, and let out a rapid series of clicks. Brenner sighed and fished the translator from his pocket. "Try that again." "Inefficient alignment. Human repair method contradicts established schematics." "You're welcome to take over," Brenner said, gesturing at the rusted bolts. "Go on. Be my guest." The crawler tilted its head, a long fluid sac along its neck tightening and releasing like a pump valve. "I lack appendages designed for rotational force." "Then maybe don't critique the guy with the wrist tendons. You are utilizing a torque ratio that risks strain on your damaged limb. I'm using my other arm. You are compensating. Muscle distribution in human bipedal frames is asymmetrical. Your dominant side is overexerted." "Did Elchi send you?" "No. I am independently alarmed." "And yet," Brenner said, wrenching the last bolt free with a sharp twist, "I'm still functioning." The plate dropped with a clang. He switched tools and began clearing residue from the exchanger's intake grid. The crawler scuttled down beside him, limbs twitching. "Explain your persistence." "Persistence? You continue physical engagement despite multi-system trauma history. You know, most people just say good job and move on. I do not understand the reward structure behind enduring dysfunction." "Because it's not about reward," Brenner said, wiping grime off his forearm with a cloth. "It's about not letting one break turn into every break." The crawler made a low, gurgling buzz. Brenner had learned that meant either confusion or digestion. Possibly both. You interpret injury as temporary. You do not reclassify function as diminished. I reclassify function as temporary too. The crawler stared, then retracted its eye stalks. "Unstable ideology. Maybe, but it works." He stood, stretched his back, and rotated his shoulder, not the injured one, and exhaled. The exchanger hummed quietly behind him, now cleared and back online. For hours later, he was back in the crew commons, cradling a mug of ginger infusion with both hands. The heat soothed his tendons, and he flexed carefully, watching the skin around the scar tissue. The break site had healed, but there was still that faint resistance when he gripped anything tightly. He didn't mind. It wasn't about perfect. Across the room, Captain Ivarus strode in, trailed by 2 visitors, both Namari, slender beings wrapped in long, fluid robes that shimmered like oil on glass. One of them glanced toward Brenner the way a museum-goer might look at a functional antique. "Engineer Bailey," Ivarus called. "Do you have a moment?" He stood, easing his left hand into his pocket, and crossed over. "These are protocol observers from the Namari Accord. They're here to assess risk models for multi-species crews. The taller Namari inclined their head. We have been briefed on your recent incident. Which one? Brenner asked. The orthopedic disjunction. I assume that means the arm. It is unusual. You sustained internal failure and resumed full operational status. Without surgical augmentation. I had a cast. Primitive. Effective. The second Namari tapped a small orb, which unfolded into a hovering screen. We have reviewed your biometrics. Pain thresholds, stress markers, recovery rates. They are erratic. Sounds about right. You are considered fully functional? Mostly. I can't play piano anymore, but I never could to begin with. The Namari paused, processing the sentence. We are attempting to understand how your species tolerates degradation without immediate restoration protocols. Because we don't always have immediate restoration protocols. That is unacceptable. To you. To most sentient frameworks. Brenner shrugged. We get hurt. We heal. Sometimes it's messy. The taller Namari leaned forward. You did not withdraw from duty. I modified duty. There's a difference. You accepted risk of re-traumatization. I accepted that sitting still wouldn't get me better. After a moment of silence, the Namari folded their screens and turned to the captain. Observation complete. Requesting access to Hydro Archive for further study. Captain Ivarus nodded. The Namari departed silently. Brenner turned to leave, but the captain stopped him with a raised hand. Didn't think you'd be the ship's most requested case study. I thought it'd be Elchi's hairless stress ferrets. Their official name is Therapy Murox. They shriek when you look at them. They sense unresolved tension. They sense everything, even silence. Ivarus tilted her head. Seriously, though, you doing all right? Better than I was. Worse than I will be. You keep answering like a fortune cookie. Sorry. Habit. She let him go. The next morning, just after first cycle meal, Elchi intercepted him outside the hydroponics bay. I have completed a comparative analysis between human and Veraxi orthopedic trauma responses. Did I win? You are a statistical anomaly. Only on Tuesdays. Elchi ignored that. You have regained 93% of prior function in your limb. Residual instability remains but appears non-progressive. So I'm cleared. You are already cleared. I am merely recording the outcome. I could have told you the outcome weeks ago. You predicted your own recovery timeline with 95% accuracy. That is abnormal. I know my body. That is not typical. Maybe not for you. They walked together down the central corridor, passing a group of Corellian navigators who nodded politely before returning to their orientation charts. My research will be published in the Interspecies Medical Forum, Elchi said. Your case has redefined our understanding of resilience categorization. Glad to be part of the literature. You did not behave like a patient. I wasn't trying to. You were obstinate. Non-compliant. Repetitive in your defiance. And now I'm better. Elchi stopped walking. That is what unsettles me. Brenner turned. What? That I healed. That you were correct. The two locked eyes. Then Elchi handed him a small, rectangular device. Your final clearance form. Signed and archived. Congratulations. Brenner accepted it, tucked it into his vest, and walked off without ceremony. Later that day, he participated in a routine systems drill. No pain. No hesitation. Just motion, fluid and automatic. He used both hands without thinking, and when a panel jammed, he reached up and unlatched it using the same arm that had once refused to hold its own weight. No one applauded. No one gasped. No one called medical. It was just work. After the drill, he returned to his quarters, sat on the edge of the bunk, and unwrapped the soft brace he no longer needed. He turned it over in his hands once, then sealed it in a storage case. As he closed the lid, the overhead display blinked with a new alert. Routine diagnostics required in the propulsion housing. He stood, cracked his shoulder once not out of pain, just habit, and left without a word. No ceremony, no reflection, just another quiet day where nothing broke beyond repair. And no one called it catastrophic.